All right, guys. As usual, we're back again this week with the 11th episode of Attack on Titan. We'll be doing our weekly review discussion. But it is in fact episode 11, correct? Because I know last
Yeah.
week we had that wrong.
Mhm.
Yeah. So let's get into our initial thoughts. What did you think of the episode?
Yeah. I thought that I personally thought this was like one of the more chill, like not too much going on episodes. So
Mhm.
like one of the things that I think is a measure of mine for how much I like an episode is how much it like ties up older loose ends or how much it like sort of adds intrigue.
Mhm.
Whereas this episode didn't do a lot of that, but I think it did do very important stuff, like with Gabby's relationship with her own race and Eldians and Paradis versus Eldians and Marley. It was doing a lot for that, but beyond that, I don't think there were like very many like threads that were like really touched on this episode, which left me a little bit disappointed. Regardless, I think it was a very good episode.
Yeah, I agree. As usual, I think this will be the case for most of the season at least. It's a good episode. But as you said, for me, it's the same kind of thing. I judge the episode quality based on like how many things they tie up, and yeah, exactly what you said. A little look into behind the scenes. We take notes after each episode, and so a good scale for me on how good the episode is how many timestamps and how much I've written
Mm,
out for the episode, and that usually gives me an indication of like how this episode compares to other episodes.
yeah. And was this more or less than your average?
I'd say significantly less. Yeah,
Yeah, same here. I think I had like four timestamps.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I reach for as much as possible, and I still didn't have too much. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there
Well,
are still a few things we can talk about.
yeah. So let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first big thing to note here, and I think the biggest theme throughout this whole episode really is just about Gabi and Falco coming to terms with the fact that the people in Paradis are very different from them, but that they're also still people. The episode starts off with Gabi kind of destroying this guy. She knocks him out, which is enough for them to escape. But then you see right here just her wailing on him repeatedly, and she ends up killing him. And then if we flash forward a bit, we see a little bit more of Gabby's kind of thinking about this. We see how she really only just wants answers as to why Zeke betrayed her, and then will just wants to die. And even a bit later, we see Falco rip off her armband because he thought that it would make them stick out. And Gabby just completely loses it on him. She's like, "Oh, I'm a good Eldian. I'm not like the devil's here," kind of showing just how brainwashed she is and how she doesn't want to seem like the people that she thinks are so bad here. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this like just cements Gabby as like the epitome of this opinion or like ideal that's been played with throughout this season of the Eldians and Marley hating the Eldians in Paradis because of sort of the propaganda and then maybe some true things, but mostly propaganda fed to them. And the thing that I think is most interesting about Gabby right now is her parallel to Eren in this hatred. She has this hatred for the Paradis Eldians the same way that Eren had hatred for Titans, I guess. But the way that she's facing it is a lot different. Like, Gabby's hatred are for like actual people who she can like sit down and talk to. And
Mhm.
although like there are Titan shifters that Eren ended up talking to and becoming friends with, for the most part, there's no arc where Eren comes to love Titans, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's a divergence, but I'm just trying to find the connecting joint between those two because I think it's pretty clear that Gabby is supposed to be like a parallel to Eren.
Yeah. What I would say is, I think, like you said, obviously Aaron didn't be with the Titans and become civil with them, but Gabby much earlier on found out that the people are just people, you know? And I think with Aaron, he spent so long actually fighting with these people, whereas Gabby just kind of heard of them and kind of formed an opinion in her mind. Whereas Aaron actually was fighting like these Titans that had come. And then he actually went to Marley and was surrounded by those people. And I'm sure when he first got there, he had to have had the same reaction as Gabi did. Maybe not as extreme, killing them, but he did that later on. I think eventually he just kind of got used to the fact that they're just people, and that talk with Reiner really showed that, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the final big moment for Gabi here, if you want to cut to it, is at 1930,
Yeah.
when. So first off, it's so like in your face the fact that Gabi and Falco are now living with Sasha's family.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, definitely.
and Gabi straight up murks Sasha. But yeah, I think that this is like the start of the like Gabi learning that she shouldn't be racist, or it's not as simple as racist versus not racist because she is an Eldian, but yeah, this is her learning to unlearn some of those things that she was taught earlier. Because the way that this conversation goes, she sort of like feeds the boilerplate answers, right? Like she's speaking as if she's like reading a textbook, right? Like, or like she was probably trained in her warrior training,
Mhm.
uh, like how to, or like why the Eldians are so bad, and like taught in such like a textbook fashion, right? That like she's just kind of rattling off these facts.
Mhm.
Um, but like she's confronted with reality, somebody whose like mother was like killed, uh, yeah, by Titans, and she like has to realize that maybe the things that she learned in her training aren't like exactly right.
Yeah, I think that also shows early in the episode too, when I think it was the scene I showed earlier, where Falco rips it off, and I think it's what she says exactly is like, I don't want to be like them. I'm like a good LD, and like I follow the rules essentially is what she's getting at. And yeah, just like you said, she was taught this her whole life. She was brainwashed. So these are kind of the answers that she's not even thinking about them. She's just regurgitating them. Like, oh, obviously, like you guys are devils. Your people were horrible, and we should all be punished for it.
Yeah.
Generations after the fact, exactly, especially.
So the thing about this part, we do get an update about Hizuru, and how they do feel about Paradis. And Kiyomi gives this like boilerplate, like congratulations for your victory. But it's a little bit confusing because it seemed like last episode Hizuru had said as a nation that they don't want to, continue to be allied with Paradis, but this kind of paints a different picture. My guess is they are still like trade allies with Paradis, but they don't want to send their, like they're not willing to support Paradis in a military sense, and their allyship might even be secret to like everyone, right? So like on Paradis, I think their allyship is probably secret to like even the high-ranking scouts like Eren and Mikasa and them, because if you remember from the last episode, Hanji comes over and she says like the talks with Hizuru are done. There's nothing there. What I'm thinking is that Hanji did like end up striking a trade deal, but nothing military, right? And then also the way that they said that they're trying to make Paradis out to be the world's enemy, I really wouldn't be surprised if this is also a secret from the rest of the world that Hizuru is trading with Paradis.
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar to that when you were talking. I was thinking that probably is what it is. They originally planned to be open allies against the rest of the world that was going to come and attack Paradis. But it seems like the people of Zero didn't think it would be beneficial to have an open relationship and help Paradis in the open because it would also make them a target. Whereas if they secretly help Paradis, then Paradis is painted as everyone's villain, like they said in the last episode. But then they can still help just on the down low.
So there's another, I think, very interesting scene here that made me think a lot. Because Hanji has this flashback to Pastor Nick from like season 3. Uh, and it's, or maybe this was season 2, but still, it's very interesting that she now feels that she's in Pastor Nick's shoes. And I think the way that you can break this down is like Pastor Nick was at a point where he knew a lot more than everybody else about, the nature of the walls, the nature of the king, really what was going on in this world. And now Hanji's in that same position and she's doing the same thing that he did and like not telling anyone. We just had that scene where um, everybody was like hounding her, like, hey, like tell us some information. And she's like, no, no, no. Um, because now she's in a point where she has to hide this stuff from the general populace. And so I think that it's very interesting that Hanji, this person who in season three, or no, season two,
I
like
think.
hung Pastor Nick off of the wall and said like talk or else,
Mhm.
because she was just so fed up with him not saying anything, now has to be in that same position of not saying anything, like for the sake of Eldians. But really, what does that mean?
So the next big thing to know is another flashback, this time of Mikasa. So Mikasa just locked this girl in her cell, and she was talking to her about how, just about how she thinks that Eren is doing what's right, and how she also thinks that killing is wrong, but that ultimately it is what it is. And then we get a flashback that we had earlier in the season, where Eren saves Mikasa from these kidnappers, and then we see in this scene, in this flashback specifically, a focus on this final part where it's Eren covered in blood approaching her, saying, "You're safe now, Mikasa." Obviously, and I think that this shows that she's kind of, to some degree, always known that Eren was willing to do bad things. I think that what this flashback is doing is she wants to focus on the fact that he is like, you're safe now, Mikasa, in the fact, like, basically he's taking care of her, but she's stricken with the reality of the fact that he was doing like this awful thing at the time that he said that. So I think it's two differing things that she's trying to fight as to which one she thinks is real.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know how much I've said this before, but there's this whole bird theory about this season.
Yep.
And I have something legitimate to say about it right here. We see a shot in this flashback where Eren is sort of like hunkered over this guy, but then Mikasa like looks out the window to see the birds.
Mhm.
Um, and what I think this is like representing is, like, I think birds in this series represent like freedom, uh, whatever that means, because freedom is like this thing that's so undefined, right? Like, how do you get to freedom? But they do represent it, right? That is like the attainable or like the unattainable desire, right? Freedom, those birds.
Mhm.
And so Mikasa in this flashback is like associating Eren and his like violent rampage with freedom, or like maybe it's showing that back then she had to associate those two things, right?
Mhm.
Um, those birds that were right there and Eren who was saving her right there. But in this season and after Eren's like latest actions, she's going to have to start to deassociate these things because Eren is not necessarily the idealized freedom that she desires. So yeah, I think that the point of including the birds in this scene was to show that from a young age, Mikasa made that mental link, and that's why she, is ride or die for Eren.
Yeah, I think we talked about this. I'm not sure if it was in the last episode or if it was after the fact and we were just talking, but we talked about the fact that we think Mikasa is gonna. It's pretty clear that Mikasa is slowly coming to the fact that Eren is doing some like wrong things, and I'm not sure if I made the statement in the recording or not, but I think that Mikasa is eventually gonna be the one that has to put Eren down. And I think that scenes like this are going to start showing up more often, where we see Mikasa kind of thinking back to how Eren was, maybe coming to terms with the fact that he isn't this like perfect person that she thinks he is, and that she can't really blindly follow him anymore. And I think it's going to be building to the fact that she's either going to have to kill him or in some way betray him.
There's one more thing that I this is a connection that I drew, but I'm not sure how important this is. But I think like Falco is the anti Mikasa. Um, so Mikasa in this scene uh, sees this person that she like truly admires and associates him with freedom and sort of like buys into his violence thing, and she ends up like fighting back in that fight that happened. But in this little scene where Gabi starts to grab the pitchfork and, and presumably like straight up kill Kaya, Falco is the one who like grabs it and stops her, right? And we've seen Falco do this like multiple times, like stop Gabi from doing like the weird violent thing that she was gonna do.
Yeah.
And what this really makes me think is that since Gabi is the parallel to Eren, like at least in this scene or in some scenes, like Falco is kind of the parallel to Mikasa. And Falco's decision right now to stop the violence and just like try to figure things out and not jump to the worst conclusion is why I think like Falco is going to play like a huge role later on and like will somehow be the one that like, resolves all the conflict.
Yeah, I think if Mikasa had the same character as Falco and was able to actually like stand up to the person that's doing these bad things, then maybe we wouldn't be so far deep, you know?
Yeah. And like, end speculation stuff. I think that Mikasa is going to have to betray Eren at some point, maybe do him in, but she already like let him get that far. Like she's already sort of tainted.
Mhm.
She's embraced the evil already. And so yeah, she might die. She might like just be done with things there because there's maybe not atonement for her after this, but Falco is like the model for okay, we're not going to do that again. We're gonna like, do things right this time.
I think one of the final things in the episode, a bit smaller, but still I think pretty significant, is we get a little bit more teasing as to what we were thinking last episode. We see Commander Pixis come in talking to Yelena, talking about how Flock was the one that escorted her back to her lodging 10 months ago. And around that time, he started acting more extreme, I guess is the word. And then around that same time, as he's saying right here, she was living very close to Eren. And around that same time, Eren also started acting on his own, as Pixis puts it. And so I think the connection he's trying to draw here is that maybe Yelena came in and said something to him at some point, and this kind of goes off of what we were talking about. Sorry about the horse, but last episode where it seems like someone said something to Eren. He gained some new information or whatever, and that's what caused this big change. And it's seeming like it was Yelena that was the one who did it. Likely, at least. It's likely.
I think they're super like adamant in painting Yelena as this puppet master.
Hmm.
Uh, because Yelena was obvious. So in the Brave Volunteers episode, Yelena was shown to be like a little weird and a little bit of a follower of Zeke.
Yes.
But in the last episode, when we had those soldiers eating around the table, I think one of them says that Yelena is probably the one that convinced Historia to be pregnant. And like people are keep on saying like Yelena's sus, Yelena's sus,
Mhm.
because she totally is. And I think that like Yelena seems like the character who's gonna have that like manic breakdown and just like reveal everything at once.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, that's the vibe I get.
Mhm. Do you have anything to add about what we said?
Yeah, yeah. Beyond that, there's some choice wording here that furthers what might not be a crackpot theory anymore. Pixa says that 10 months ago, this celebration happened. Uh, and also 10 months ago, or like after that celebration 10 months ago, Yelena started talking to Eren, right? So, or probably started talking to Eren.
Yeah,
So we know then that Eren was here at least 10 months ago.
Mhm.
We think about again some timelines, right? Historia is pregnant. Historia is very pregnant, actually. Historia was likely impregnated anywhere from 7 to 8 or 9 even months ago. Um, the timeline that is very possible for a certain Aaron Yeager to be the father of that child. Uh, no updates beyond that, but we know it's possible now.
Yeah, I think last episode when we initially brought forth this theory, it was last episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
It seemed a lot more outrageous because it didn't seem very practical that Aaron wouldn't have been in Marley for that long. But now we have direct information knowing that Aaron was there for 10 months. And yes, they did show some other guy as being like the dad. But
They
I
didn't show
don't
his
think
face.
they didn't show his
They
face.
particularly avoided showing his face.
And why would we talked about this last episode, but why would Historia approach this guy to impregnate her that she doesn't love, first of all,
Yeah.
when she wasn't supposed to be pregnant at all? I don't think Historia was the type that would just do that to avoid having to pick up a Titan, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. She was down with the Titan plan. For
Completely
some
down.
reason, Eren and or Yelena convinced Historia, because I also don't think that Historia was just like in love with Eren.
Yeah.
Uh yeah, Historia has shown love for one character in this series and she is dead.
Yes.
Um yeah, so who knows where this can of worms will lead us. So we get this great like post credit scene, I guess, where we're back in Marley and we see the warrior unit having a meeting. First thing, Commander Magath seems to have realized that Zeke did in fact betray the warriors and is sided with Paradis. Magath initially suggests then that like they launch a attack on Paradis in 6 months, but everybody else says no, like let's go now. Surprise attack. Most notably Reiner, who very recently was looking very down bad, and not wanting to fight anyone really, just wishing to be done with it. But he got this fire back. So there's some logistical plot things we could talk about. But first off, why do you think Reiner got his fire back?
Yeah, I mean, the Arina that we see here is a completely different person to the one we've been seeing in the past. For the rest of the season, honestly, the rest of the season, Ryan has been like down horribly. He's been so out of it. And the last time we saw him, he seemed ready to die. He seemed like he was just, there was no fire left in him. He didn't want to keep fighting. I think there's a few reasons why. One being, well, I have two. One being more likely and one being less likely, but more
Sure.
interesting. I think the more likely one is he makes a comment during this about how, or not in this part, but this part that we see before the actual opening, towards the beginning of the episode, where he's like, I heard Gabi and Falco's names. Where are they? So what I would imagine is they told him what happened to Gabi and Falco, how they're in Paradis. And that's what kind of lit that fire in him, like, oh, we have to save them, which is probably what's more likely. What's more fun to think about is the fact that we have another betrayal coming up. And I'm not too convinced on this. I haven't really fleshed out the theory, but there's a few points throughout the show where I've thought maybe Reiner is not fully allied with Marley and maybe at some point switched up and wants to actually help Eldians. The reason I'm thinking this is if Marley attacks Paradis now, do they not just get destroyed? The likelihood of
I
winning this fight doesn't seem too high, does it?
I mean, okay. Marley is a world superpower still.
Yeah.
And does in fact have, what is it, 3
Three Titans.
Titans? Um, yes, clearly like their navy is not doing good, but the biggest thing they have right now is the surprise attack, right? Like a couple well-placed Titans. And think about how like skillfully Eren organized himself during the Marley attack to just eat Willie. Clearly Willie wasn't the Warhammer Titan, but if they did something similar with like Galliard, for example, and they tried to eat Eren or Armin or something, then I think they could succeed. I think they could totally get people in Paradis and like have nobody notice. I think a lot of people don't even know what like Galliard or Peak look like as people, so they could just be chilling. And so yeah, I don't think that it's so easy for Paradis to win this. I think they should be favored, especially since it's on their ground. But
it won't be
yeah, yeah, and I think that possibly they go and they rescue Gabi and Falco, and they make out. Maybe they like totally get wrecked, but they might rescue Gabi and Falco.
Yeah, that does seem like the more likely thing, and that is what I think will be happening. But most of all, it's just nice to see Reiner back.
Yeah, I mean, if we remember in episode 3, I think when Reiner is ready to like just blow his own brains out. He feels the bump on the wall from Falco.
Yeah.
And then he's like, all right, you know what? I'm going to keep living. I have those guys.
Mhm.
But now Eren and his crew have taken those guys. So I think that that's like sort of the emotional justification and backing for this development, right? Like
Yes.
Reiner was ready to die because he knew that there were people out there who were going to live like better lives than him.
Mhm.
But now that's not so sure because Gabi and Falco are in Paradis. So he's
One
going to
other
go
thing
back.
that I will propose is it's clear that Falco and Gabby, while being in Paradis, are growing to better understand the situation and kind of realize that, like we've said before, there's good people on both sides. Do you think that maybe when Reiner comes to rescue them, Falco sees what's happening and that Marley's actually attacking them and tells Reiner, we can't let this keep happening, and that maybe leads Reiner to not betray Marley and not side with Paradis, but try to stop the fighting and whatever ensues from that happens?
I think that Falco is definitely going to play a role in stopping the fighting.
Mhm.
I also feel that there's a good chance that Falco inherits Reiner at some point.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that Reiner is not coming back from Paradis, I guess, is what I'll say. Reiner might play a role in stopping things, but I feel like it will mostly be Falco. Um, yeah,
Yeah. And so I believe now that's everything, correct?
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So then, with that being said, we'll catch you guys next episode with episode 12 of.
Right.
Yeah, like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys then.